Welcome to the Outside Insights podcast. Our goal is to provide content and ideas that help people close their personal and professional gaps by hearing how others have done it. I'm your host, Chris Burkhardt, and today I'm thrilled to have Mike Smith on the show. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be here.
Thanks for coming on. So to introduce Mike, I guess to the broader audience, I think of you as a public servant, a community leader here in Delaware, family man, someone committed to living a full and active life. I'm going to hopefully make you smile. I dare say an endurance athlete, if you might.
Yeah, I would go with that. Sure.
I'm going to go with that too. Coach in lots of sports for his son's team, very active in everything. And you're an active volunteer and a Rotarian. We share that. I was a Rotarian for many, many years. So, question to help explain your background. You've been dedicated to public service. What was your inspiration behind that path? How did you take this path?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Nobody's really ever asked it to me that way. They've only asked me how I made the decision to run, never the path. And that's a lot different of an answer. I would credit my grandmother with the path, quite honestly. She was a woman who ended up raising me after the age of 10, but we had a close relationship before then. And she used to always make me on weekends go volunteer at different places and help raise money for people that wanted to make a wish or someone at the church who was struggling, whatever it may be. One example, if you remember the Delaware Blue Bombers basketball, semi-pro basketball team.
Of course.
I used to
Absolutely.
I used to go work their concession stand to raise money on weekends when I wasn't playing sports or doing something. She had a knack for saying that, to be the holistic person that you need to be, you have to give back every week. And whether that was tithing at church or whether that was your time. So I would definitely credit her in kind of embedding that into the fabric.
Well, that's a smart person. I think our measure of success and frankly happiness is oftentimes rooted in giving back.
Yeah.
I don't get happiness by material things. It's by doing good and by helping others. And Mike and I have known each other quite some time. You often you give your grandmother all the credit, and it sounds like she should get it.
Yeah, without her, I don't even know that I'd be here, quite honestly. She gave me every opportunity to have a new life, a renewed life, life of purpose. So definitely, credit to her for helping.
So I'm going to craft hopefully a couple questions differently. You're on the House of Representatives representing Delaware in the 22nd district. Yep. What I think is interesting is most of us hear that and we have no idea actually what that means. And what do you do and how do you do it? So I hope you don't mind me making it less political.
Yeah, sure.
But could you practically explain that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Funny enough, it's a question I get a lot when I go to speak to like Boy Scout troops or when they're getting their Eagle Scout things, because everybody wants to know, like, what's the job really like? At the end of the day, from my leadership style to the job itself, I look at it as a servant leader. That's what you are. You're a servant leader. But tangibly, what you do is, you're expected to go to the state capitol, which is Dover. You have to be there a certain amount of days every calendar year between January and June 30th. You're put on multiple committees that represent your district and the state, and you take votes and write bills that become law that are then implemented. I would say, is a small part of the job. Some of the biggest part of the job is to kind of be the servant leader. So can't even tell you how many emails or phone calls or Facebook messages or Instagram messages or getting tagged on Nextdoor or in Hocus and Gossip Girls in some group on, issues that are happening in the district, from a sign to a road to a drainage concern to a public safety issue to a school issue, that I end up kind of being the conduit between the problem and the solution. And that's tangibly what the day-to-day is. It's considered a part-time job. I consider it roughly 2 to 3 jobs if you think about the amount of hours it takes. And something, again, that I think has been woven into the fabric of who I am. But it's been a wild journey so far, and definitely one worth living.
So at the end of the day, it's the stories people tell about you, and I may be biased in knowing you for a long time before this role. What I hear, Mike, is how you're likely to help someone who's not even in your district.
Yeah, all the time. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I actually learned that, Chris, from Congressman Mike Castle. If you remember Mike Castle.
absolutely.
So early in my career, I worked for him, and I'll tell you a story. We were in Wilmington. That's where his congressional state headquarters was, and then that's also where our campaign office was at a totally different location. And I remember one day he called me and said, "Meet me in Rodney Square," because he had an issue he had to deal with. But while we were in Rodney Square, he was like, "Hey, make sure you bring a notebook and a pen." So I did. He goes, if people come up to me and ask me for something, or if I have a problem, it's your job to write it down and figure it out. And I was like, okay. And he goes, "I'm not going to tell you what information you should ask for. It's your job to figure that out so that you can solve the problem." I'm like, okay. So, I asked the standard type of thing, Chris, like, what's your name? What's your phone number? What's your address, right? Like, what are the details? And then I'll never forget this. He asked me, he goes, "Did you ask them if they are a Republican or a Democrat or an other?" And I said, "Oh, no, I didn't. Was I supposed to?" He goes, "No, you're not. You're just supposed to help people. So I'm glad that you didn't. Thank you for representing me well." And I'll never forget that. That was just a key of how you're supposed to do it when you're doing it. And, just a lesson to a young kid who didn't know he would be doing this one day too. So
this is a minor digression, but a Delaware story. Mike played basketball on a team in the 70s where my dad, Placer's company, was the sponsor and played. But if I recall, there were quite a few politicians. I would be overstepping if I said all the names, but I know that Mike and my father, Alan, for whatever reason, played on a basketball team in the 70s, and it makes me laugh.
There's some stories about Castle's competitive spirit in sports.
Yes, I think that's where I was headed, and thank you for cutting me off. But yeah, I think they'll be left to the imagination. I think they're better in that way.
We might have that in common too.
Yeah. Oh well. Yeah, and perhaps you and I as well, right? All right. So, anything else you want to share about the House of Reps? I think you did a masterful job of kind of bringing it to life.
Yeah, no, I think one fun part is not enough people come down to the Delaware General Assembly at Legislative Hall. I would just, if you're local to Delaware, I'd welcome everybody to come down for a tour, or, to sit in on a committee hearing or a session and just kind of see what it's all about. Because I think one misnomer is everyone just watches the television and thinks like what happens nationally is what happens locally. And in some cases that can be true. Don't get me wrong. Not naive to that. But it's a lot different. I think it's a way to break down kind of those silos if anyone's ever interested. So
I'm going to take you up on that because I've only ever been there on a day where I was asked to be there for an industry or something that was a bit more orchestrated. I'd kind of like to see regular stuff. So, Mike, you've got a day job.
I do.
You want to bring that to life just a touch?
Yeah, so it's actually my 10-year anniversary. I've been working at the University of Delaware for the College of Health. Yeah, thank you. For the College of Health Sciences, their Director of Strategic Initiatives. Done a lot since we're there. I think on LinkedIn I describe it as we built buildings, we created programs, we've gotten a lot of people into the workforce that otherwise wouldn't have been. Grown our research portfolio over 300%. It's been a great journey, and a lot of my jobs to kind of be the chess master and orchestrator of creating partnerships, making those connections, strategic planning, government affairs, marketing, communications, even some development and fundraising as well. So.
That's a whole lot. If you've ever been to U of D and seen this corner of the campus of this work, it's an unbelievable output. So
yeah, I think I don't fully appreciate the growth that it's had over the last 10 years because I'm sitting there all the time. But if I shared a video when I was speaking to Leadership Delaware earlier this year, and it was a drone video of what it was like when we started versus where we are now. And we're creating Delaware's largest city within a city. It's incredible the growth that has happened there, and taking a former Chrysler manufacturing plant that used to make tanks for the Korean War and the Dodge Durango during 9/11, and now is transformed into a science, technology, and advanced research campus that has totally changed the workforce in Delaware and has more employees now on the campus by a wide margin than Chrysler ever did in its heyday already. So it's amazing.
So a bit of a loaded question. What do you think that campus looks like 10, 20, 30 years from now?
Yeah, I think if things go the way they want, they're going to keep building the density on the front part, right? Probably 3 to 6 story buildings. Probably, hopefully, some not street level parking, more like parking structures. Developing more of a work, live, play model.
Okay.
And again, I think it's at the end of the day, it has the potential in 50 to 75 years when it's all built out to be Delaware's largest city within a municipality. It's incredible.
That's
the growth that's happened there. But I think, Chris, what makes it one of the biggest, and you have to credit President Harker for his vision when this happened, but it's really hard to get that much land congruent or adjacent to where your university is. And so I think as you're seeing, capital expenditures and everything kind of get out of control with universities around the country for deferred maintenance and whatnot, this gives an opportunity to create more partnership models for spaces, where these companies want to be near the workforce. They want to be near while the students are in school and generate that interest from there. And guess what? That keeps them there.
So that's very interesting because it's a sustainable model with the private partnerships versus just another corporate campus building that, yeah.
Yeah, I just don't think, and hey, look, wearing both hats now on this from the state perspective.
I was trying to figure out how to thread the needle for you, but that's your job. I'm not going to worry about it.
No, I think that's what's great about my job on both sides, quite honestly. I get to have the view of how it all works, right? So that way, like when you're looking at the expenditure on a taxpayer side, how that should work. And, deferred maintenance is not a sustainable model to just continuously build buildings. You got to really, I think, look in the future of what the workforce you want it to look like is, and you invest in those programs and those things. But if you're willing to have strategic partners help you with that capital expense and that upfront cost, I think that creates sustainability because then we're growing together.
Is it often hard to have the kind of like the same objective with a strategic partner, or is it enough of an overlap that it works?
No, I think that's enough that an overlap that it works. Because I think, when, as you know, when it comes to any sort of partnership, you have to have a value proposition and value add for both. It can't be for one or it doesn't work. And so I think that's what makes it work.
So you use the word servant leadership. Do you have a particular way you define that and the way you internalize it?
The way I internalize it from a servant leadership perspective is your service is at the center of everything that you do. So you are there to serve people. You are not there to be served in any realm. So to me, when you apply that, whether you're the CEO or whether you're someone who is lower level trying to work their way up, you're willing to do whatever for the team. It's a team-based model. I'll actually go over 3 things that I've been teaching my kids about, if I might, real quick, because I think it goes to that. But to me, I've been trying to teach, as a coach, I've been trying to teach my kids, and I think we live in a world of collective individualism versus a collective team sometimes. And so I've been trying to teach my children and the kids that I coach what it means to be a teammate. And I came up with 3 things that I think are at the center of what it means to be a good teammate. One is dependability. Can they count on you? Are you going to show up on time? Are you the person that they expect when you get there that day? 2, are you skilled? Do you have a skill that makes the team better? Do you have a skill that fulfills my weaknesses and gives you a strength that the team doesn't have? because that also makes you dependable because the team can count on you to fulfill the mission that way. And then 3, and probably the most important, is are you selfless? Do you care that about the team more than you do about your individual accolades? And at the end of the day, I think those 3 things all go to what it means to be a servant leader. Because if you're going to be a servant leader, especially in public service, you need to have a team-based mentality. It cannot be a political team. It needs to be a unified team, the human team. Because at the end of the day, we only get one cut at this, right? Each of us. So we want to try to make it the best that we can and make sure that everyone lives a purpose-driven life in that way. And, that's where I think the collective individualism is overtaking that role right now. But that's where I think we need to head.
It's a beautiful model. And why do I think it's easier to help young minds grasp it early and make it a part of how they do things,
I think that's 100% true. I mean, I think that's what's great about being a representative and being young and having children, to be honest with you. My oldest son has been doing this with me, right, since he was 7 years old. He's now going into 8th grade, and he's always like, well, hey, are we helping somebody this weekend? Who are we helping? Who are we giving back to? He's thinking of like, if he sees a mom carrying all this stuff and having kids, like, hey, let me run over there and get the door for her. He just thinks of the most basic things of how to help people and how to serve people. And that's just completely woven into who he is, which is, the expectation of a baseline of excellence. And I think that's tremendous.
We all want that as parents. But to do the work to help them to be the role model and to teach in models is impressive.
And I will tell you real quick. I got one really cool story about him that I thought that's when I knew that he was headed in the right direction and I could give him more trust as a parent as he's, aging and becoming more independent. I got this long message on my state representative page one day. And I was like, man, I wonder what this is. And I was locked out of it, so I had to get my admin to pull it up and send it to me. I was like, can you send it to me? This seems important. It looked like a book coming through. And come to find out, there was this girl being bullied at school. And apparently I coached her in T-ball way back when. I didn't remember that, but I did. But apparently this girl was being bullied, and Braden decided to step in and say, hey, you need to leave Susan alone. She's cool. Stop treating her like that. And I guess he got a hold of my mother-in-law and said, hey, instead of going on the bus that day, I'm going to stay and help Susan get caught up so she's not made fun of tomorrow. And it was like he sat with her for over an hour to help her get caught up on her work so that these kids would not make fun of her the next day. He had no benefit of that. He didn't get anything from that. And actually, when he got home that day, unbeknownst to me, I got the typical middle school response when I asked, how was your day? Good. Right? Like
you got the 2-syllable good. You got the extended
version. Yeah. But I showed him that message. I was like, hey, why didn't you tell me about that? Like that seemed to be like something very. What I learned after that day is I need to say, hey, what's one good thing that happened today? What's one bad thing that happened today? Or what's one thing that made me feel a certain way? Whatever. I started asking more probing questions, but I asked him like, why did you not tell me about that? And he goes, why would I tell you about that? That's what I should have done regardless. It's not a special moment. That's how you told me I'm supposed to act.
When your kid teaches you why, that's called the third reason, right? When you do something so that you can tell someone or so that someone sees you.
Right.
Well, good for him for knowing you don't have to live that way. That's awesome.
Yeah. And that's I would think is a great example of what it means to be a servant.
Very impressive. And I love your use of stories. So a big part of this podcast and even the writing is I just meet so many people that are trying to figure out their life and get what they want. So whether it's a life well lived or an earned life. And when you and I caught up, you talked about some other principles, the 4 C's.
Yeah.
Do you want to build on those?
Yeah, sure. For me, I think like life is all about purpose, but every day we get a new opportunity to recommit or or change what that could mean for us, because really we have a daily opportunity. That's what life is. We don't know what's going to happen the next day, so you have to take full advantage. And so during COVID is kind of where I came up with these. I was just trying to simplify life a little bit. I was also just thinking back about my life, and you're spending more time with family and kids and things, and it's like they're asking you questions, they want to see yearbooks, and that just leads down the rabbit hole of talking about things more, which is great.
Yeah.
Um, So I always just say this: it's like life starts with a baseline of everybody has a level, different set of circumstances that they're born with, different things that happen to them after birth that are circumstances, right? But through a series of choices, you can make your life anything that you want. But you have to commit and you have to be consistent in doing those things. And so those are the 4 C's. And so I try to preach those a lot to people. I come from absolutely a tough level of trauma, and I never looked at myself as not getting every opportunity. Sometimes it just takes a lot more choices over a period of time and a lot longer of a time to make it happen for yourself. But that's where the commitment and the consistency come in to do those things. That way, I always say it this way, Chris, that way life is not happening to you, life is happening for you. And I think the 4 C's go to the life happening for.
So how many times a day do you tell that story, and how does your work impact that? For me, it resonates so much because I deal with thousands of Delawareans who are trying to have the career that they want.
Right.
And it is very much about the choices that we made, but the choices we make and the commitment and the consistency to that path. I'm sure you use it in all your jobs.
I use it in all my jobs. I call it the 24-hour lifestyle. I just say, like, you have 24 hours and not every day is going to be the same. I mean, to be excellent in something, to be different in something, like, you can't be balanced all the time. You just can't. But you find balance later, right? Maybe. So I just look at it as, whether you're trying to change your level of fitness because you got bad health news, or if you're trying to get to a certain place in your career, whatever it may be, you got to keep recommitting and being consistent in those things and making choices to head down that path. So I bring it up every day in some capacity. We were doing some mental health legislation in Dover, and the speaker asked me to tell more about my personal story to my colleagues on the House floor one day. Didn't really intend to do that. I don't like to necessarily just, I'm not somebody who like goes and has a public speaking career and like is going out to tell everybody with a book or something. But, it was a good opportunity to kind of flesh that out and allow people to understand a little bit of why I have the mentality that I have. And say, like, that's why I firmly believe in the 4 C's, because I'm living proof of it. But again, like, you have to commit to those things and make choices within those. You can't let your circumstances dictate everything else. The 3 other C's have to overtake your circumstances. Otherwise, life's going to happen to you instead of for you.
So, Mike, I'd love to get your opinion. One of the things that I'm very focused on is a concept of the culture of one, which is all about having people ask themselves questions to really get to know themselves, to figure themselves out. So, because so many times your choices take longer if you're not sure what you want, if you're not sure where you are, or if you're not sure where you're going, you make choices to survive, right? Versus a real knowing way. So I assume that model addresses that, where you've really got to figure out who you are and what you want and apply that model.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, at some point, right? Like, you deal with this in business too, but you got to do your own internal SWOT analysis too, and I think that goes to that. And I think what's interesting. Parents used to always say you can be anything you want to be, and while that can be true in some cases, there's a lot of variables for that. Like, have you figured out what you're good at? Have you maybe figured out how to double down on that, or monetize on that, or build a career on that? And what's the geography of that? Like, where, what are the companies available to you for that? All those things.
So I think I just did a talk on that, and the only one that was missing is, you just nailed it, by the way. The only one that I added to it was, are you the type that is more of a solo artist, or are you somebody that wants to sit in a group of people? Like,
Right.
if you're an extrovert and you find yourself at home, like, that's probably not a good thing, right? So, but how many times do I think we end up needing to learn those lessons along the way to figure out what we want from those choices?
No, absolutely. I think all of your choices kind of give you that next realm of what path you're going to take. And so, I always say my mentor, when I was younger and first starting with Castle, he gave me really good advice, like from a career standpoint, right? It was, in your 20s, try a lot of different things, because you think you know what you want to do when you get out of college. You think you know your exact path, but life is like this and like this. It's never like this. And so try a bunch of things to figure it out. You'll see different leadership styles. You'll learn about different companies, different groups. You'll learn from different people. In your 30s, narrow it down a little bit. In your 40s, lock in and work as hard as you can and make your money, and then enjoy retirement. But, from a path perspective, like, you gotta iron out those wrinkles early.
Mike, what I didn't know is, in the 50s, that you don't have the same octane in the gas tank that you do when you're in your 30s and 40s. So you got to have your impact no matter how you take care of yourself and along those things. So I am curious, you have a huge impact in Delaware. Do you feel like you're having enough impact? I'm sure you want to do more. I don't mean it as a political question. I mean more of it in thinking about your approach to life. Yeah. What's next for you in impact?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Chris. I actually probably going through my kind of why or purpose-driven question on that right now. I don't know, but I do think I am capable of more from an impact perspective, and that's a non-political answer to go to your non-political question.
Yeah, well, I'm a non-political interview. That wouldn't be good. There's other people who do that.
Me, honestly, like, if politics is my future, fine. I do think I'm capable of much more than that. That's not how I want to be defined either. Like, this isn't something I went into as a career. I never looked at it that way. I looked at it as a way to give back. I looked at it as a way of giving back to a community that really helped my grandmother raise me, and do different things. And so, yeah, I don't know, but I do think I'm capable of a lot more, and I'd like to explore that on some level, and I'm trying to figure that out.
You've shared a lot of stories. Most difficult moments of your career?
Of my career? Gosh.
No, it could be life if you prefer.
No, yeah, I think it's interesting. I never look at difficult moments in my career, really. I guess after Mike Castle lost in 2010, that was a difficult moment in my career, because you're like, now what do I do? I will tell you, I actually, it's a great lesson for this podcast. I took a job at Comcast as like let me figure out what I need to do and what I'm going to do next, and to manage a call center. So I had like 89 employees that were, I was young too. I was probably the youngest person, and they're all older than me. And I was managing like 89 employees, all their LOQs and their metrics and how they're handling customers and taking escalations and all of that. I say it was the worst, best job I've ever had, because it was awful at the time. It was awful in terms of like the work itself. I didn't really like it. It was awful in terms of the time of day I did it, because I was so young that I got the worst times to do it. So I was working like, 4 p.m. to 2:30 in the morning type stuff. But at the time, right, like, you're getting married, you're having kids. My grandma was moving in with me, so we could take care of her. And it was more of like, you just got to do what you got to do for health insurance and everything else. So I did it. But now looking back, it's probably the job that prepped me the best to be, with customer service and constituent relations, and, growing empathy, everything else when it comes to just thinking about where your career goes after that.
There's always something you can take from those stops along the way, what you like or don't like. But I'm borrowing this, but I think things happen for the best possible reasons. They just don't show us at the moment.
Right.
And that's very obvious. What you're saying is that the tougher the lesson and all that. And And right. And there, I think it's good to note. I mean, a lot of times people just come on and say, here, I'm successful, right? And reality is it is a path, and that you learn from each stop, and you're figuring something out about yourself, and you're gaining skills, as you said, and these things. And they're pretty important. I don't think we all learn from roses and unicorns. I think it's the adversity that we learn from.
Yeah, I'll give you a personal side of that too. So I think a lot of people, when I say like trauma, they think, so I'll give you in an 18-month period. My aunt committed suicide when I was 9. My mom, we found her dead 6 months later. And then my grandfather, who we all all the cousins, we went to live with our grandparents. My grandfather dies 6 months later. So we're all left with my grandma.
What was this timeline?
An 18-month period. And so my grandmother then inherits, in a very short span, a 16-year-old boy, a 13-year-old boy, and me, the 10-year-old boy. And, so I think my uncle tried to do something nice at the time, but we didn't realize the extent of his issues either. But he moved home to help Nan care for us. But the problem was he was a drug addict and an alcoholic. And that's where like the real trauma started. And so I tell people, I was like, no, I never really knew my dad. I met him 3 times, right? Like, so that's not knowing your father. But all the positive male role models I was around was my grandfather before he passed. Most of my coaches were good role models, and where I saw what being a man is supposed to be like. But most importantly, I saw it through a lot of trauma. I noticed through just all the stuff my uncle put us through. And I'm like, well, that's exactly what not to do. Not everybody has that perspective, but I'm like, my God, like,
no,
what a tornado, like chaotic life. I don't want that. I want something better.
Sometimes that has a centrifugal force, right? Where
it does.
It does. That's a hell of a story, Mike. Thank you for sharing it. I've known you for 15 years, and I kind of half knew it, right?
Yeah, a lot of people assume like, why was his grandmother so close with him, all that sort of stuff. They just kind of assume, but that's why it was also important that I took care of her when she couldn't take care of herself anymore, because I saw what she put her own life through to take care of us, for sure.
Well, what's very clear is your source of energy and inspiration. It's very clear, right? Like, and that what's great about that is when it comes from something like this, it's a wellspring that keeps on giving, right? It's not, I mean, it's deep and wide, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, they're like, why are you so happy all the time? Why are you so joyful all the time? I was like, because I've seen the other side of it. Like, what's the alternative? Like, you get to wake up every day and you get a chance to do whatever you want with it. So enjoy that. Like, that's very peaceful if you think about it.
Darn right it is. How do you keep learning?
Yeah, so I'd say a lot of different things. I like to listen to podcasts. I obviously read a lot of bills and a lot of emails and a lot of things. I don't have, because of all the coaching that I do and some of the other community stuff and the 2 jobs, I don't get a chance to read as many hardback books as I would like, but I do listen to a lot of books on Audible. So I try to do that as a way to keep learning as well. One thing I think you'd like in terms of maybe the audience for the podcast, one cool thing I used to really do post-COVID, I haven't done as much recently just because of other things, but I used to grab a cup of coffee once a month with one person I disagreed with on a particular subject.
That is phenomenal.
And just to say, hey, like, let's like put all of our experience together here and let's talk about it. Not to say either of us are 100% right here because it's nuanced, but I'd like to learn more about your perspective of why that's your take, so.
I just want to make you a centrist for saying that, but that's not fair. But
so that's okay. You can say it.
I know. I wouldn't say it if I didn't know it, but that's extraordinary. And I'm putting words in your mouth, but that's how you turn enemies into friends.
Oh, it is. One of my closest political allies right now is a former opponent of mine. And it's all because it had nothing to do with me. We got to know each other though, and we've become great friends. So,
So I'm hoping that times like this can help people realize your authenticity, the depth of your reason, your thought process behind how you carry yourself, right? And and I think people that know people are the ones that trust us and believe in us. So I give you tons of credit. So you're working around the clock. You've got all this going on. You're an endurance athlete. How do you take care of yourself? I know you're kind of a Goggins. You know of the Goggins clan. How have you worked all that into your world? And I got a heavy sigh out of you, so it must be good.
Yeah. It's just reflecting back. If you've never heard of the book Living with a Seal, so Jesse Itzler, who's an entrepreneur by his own right, and his wife, who is, as he said, created the. She's the Michael Jordan of women's underwear. I just found that to be such a cool thing. But so an entrepreneur marrying an entrepreneur, he hired David Goggins to come live with him and train with him.
And if I recall, never lets on that it's Goggins.
No, never. Not until Goggins let him later on.
Okay.
Never let on in the book that it was Goggins. But actually, a constituent of mine, who's now become a good friend, sent me that book during COVID, and that set me out on my journey, I would say, into that endurance sports and things like that. And I think it was 2 years ago, Chris. I think I did everything imaginable, from triathlons, half marathons, the Goggins Challenge itself, to everything you could think of, to the point where
the 4 and 4.
You run 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours. So I convinced a buddy of mine to do it with me, and then I convinced St. Mark's High School, Tom Fertile at the time, to turn on the lights on the track overnight so that we'd have a safe place to run the mileage. And then we had another constituent, Nick DeCare of Fusion Race Timing.
Sure.
He created a link, and people came and ran with us at different legs of it, and all the money went to charity. It was awesome. It was really cool.
Of course, I'm stuck on the book instead of the great outcome of that, but I can never look at a stationary bike again.
Yeah, I know.
Reading that book.
It is. That guy is next level. I mean, a lot of people are they think I'm next level, and I'm like, no. If you want next level, read this.
Yeah. So he helped me get up Rainier 5 years ago. I applied a lot of his mental models, if you will. Don't get me wrong, listeners, I think he's plenty flawed, and if you don't like expletives, he's not for you. But if you're trying to figure out how to get more out of your brain and use more out of your brain and therefore more out of your body, there's nobody better.
No, and I tell people this, I'm like, if you can't get past the expletives, you probably can't get past the emotion, because that's where he kind of digs into the substance, is past all of that. So,
and Mike, it's worth mentioning all our talk of how do you get to know yourself? How do you do that self-study? If you get beyond all that, Goggins is the best at those, getting you to dig deep and figure yourself out.
Yeah, he is. I mean, he makes you go to battle. He really is a big believer. Is you have to battle it out in your own mind, and you have to do it through things you don't like in order to callous yourself into things that make you better. That's really the essence of it.
So how do you take care of yourself? What have you applied to yourself?
Yeah, I started just doing a lot of different things, but I work out 6 to 7 days a week in some capacity. I mix in weight training, I mix in running, I mix in HIIT workouts, I mix in sauna, I mix in steam, I mix in a cold plunge. I try to mix in everything.
You got all the self-care worked in.
Yeah, the only thing I need to get better at, quite honestly, if I was to be self-reflective in this moment, is probably stretching. I've always been the guy that puts his leg up, puts his leg back, does a little jump squat. I'm ready to get out there. So, but I still play team sports. I'm in the Hack Basketball League. I play in Newcastle County's Flag Football League still. I just like to stay active. I find that an active Mike is a mentally better Mike, and if mentally better Mike is there, then everybody's better off when I'm serving them. And so, so this morning, for instance, I woke up at 4:30 and went out and worked out with a friend by 5, then did the sauna afterwards, and I'll probably run later tonight when I'm done door knocking. So,
Well, people would say you're young, but that has nothing to do with it.
Nah, you're as young as you want to be. You just gotta don't let the number fool you. You're as young as in the words of Dave Goggins, if you push your body, the body will respond. But you got to get past those moments where you don't think it will.
I'm big on winning the morning. I wasn't always big on winning the morning, but I think that's a big part of that, Mike. So I'll give you a little time to think about it, but I'll frame one question. But think about whatever other messages you'd like to cover. But my final question is, what advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
Yeah, my advice that I give my 21-year-old self is slow down a little bit, look around, enjoy your life, and you don't have to keep climbing. And not everything that you win is necessarily a win. Not everything that you've achieved means much in the broad scheme of things. And take some time. Like what I've learned is, focus on the relationships with people that you have, and double down on those relationships, and not what you can get out of them, but what you can put in them. Because I think a lot of people, especially in the corporate world, they're always ready to climb that corporate ladder, and they're going to find fulfillment there in some way. But at the end of the day, there's more to life than money. You need to make money, certainly, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you gotta think about a life well lived, and not just being so solar focused on the things of the world. And that's what I would tell my 21-year-old self for sure.
I think part of the challenge is that it's a ladder, it's not a ladder now. So that really screws people up, because it's not as up and down. It's a perfect answer because it's an earned answer. I think that's what's so hard about it. By following the path you've on, you can give that advice to yourself. I wonder if you can take that advice without experiencing it. That's the hard part, right?
That's the catch-22 of all of that. It's a hindsight retrospect piece of advice.
You're darn right. Yeah.
And I don't even know if I told myself that back then, Chris, I don't know that I'd even listen to myself either.
You'd be saying, "Listen, old man, I got my path. I got this."
Another thing I would do too is I'd really carve out of where I really think where I want my life to be. And I try to find more people and ask them to be my mentor, or ask them to go to coffee and learn from them, versus trying to do so many things on my own, to whether it's prove it to myself or, my grandmom or whoever it was, at the time I was trying to prove it to. But I would definitely try to learn from those that came before me more.
Well, those are difficult things like that. The aspect of that is so challenging, because I always say, be careful what you reinvent, because there's a lot of good wheels in a lot of things. But my whole path as an entrepreneur was, Mike, you don't understand. I have to do this custom. I have to do this different. And I'd spend a year building something that someone had already finished. So I think you're right on in that. So bring us home with some closing thoughts, if you'd like.
Yeah, well, I just appreciate the opportunity on being on. This has been a lot of fun catching up, and it's been an easy flow of conversation, that's for sure. But I would just say, whether it's business or life, wake up every day and reconfigure yourself on exactly where you want to go, and start developing those habits, start making those choices, start committing and being consistent in those things. And it's all about the small things that add up to big things. It's never going to be quick. So don't be so rushed in thinking that it will be. Having young kids, that's even more present in my mind, because of how they are. They want these quick fixes, and you got to show that, actually, it's the rule of 18. Have you ever heard of this? It's
No.
Tell my son every day, if you want to be in the top 1% of everything, at least 18 minutes a day or more, you need to spend on that outside of training or whatever else you're already doing.
So you'll have to contrast that with the 10,000 hour mastery. I wonder if they align.
Yeah, it's basically 18 minutes a day for a year. It adds up to that amount of time, which leads to you.
And you spread that over enough time.
Yeah, and the point is, you break it down to that nth degree. So you say 18 minutes isn't much at all.
So we'll leave you at that. Could everybody find 18 minutes to make themselves better in something that they give a hoot about?
Yep. And I'll leave you with this quote that I tell players, because I think it's true for adults too nowadays. But, if you want to question me about your playing time, check your screen time. And that's where you can find 18 minutes.
because those reels just keep coming for
They
all
just
of it.
keep coming no matter what your finger does.
It's just like, dude, and you even know better, right? And you just do, and it's like, oh my goodness.
I'm stuck in the vortex now.
And my addiction is Aussie Shepherd puppies, but man, after a while, there's my 18 minutes, Mike.
Yeah, exactly right.
Hey, we've known each other a long time. Next time, let's not do this on video, brother. Let's find some time to connect, and
let's do it.
All right. Last year, my dad, Alan Burkhardt, and I released our book, Opposite the Crowd. It's January 2024, and we've released the paperback version of the book, and it's now available on Amazon, along with hardback, Kindle, and audio formats. We've adjusted the price to be more accessible for everyone. On Audible, it will cost you a credit, or you can pay outright. If you'd like to get the audiobook a little cheaper, you can look at Spotify and other outlets that sell audiobooks. We have the links to where you can find it in the show notes, so take you straight to it. And Opposite the Crowd. If you want the life you want, you got to know who you are.